We're heading first to Pakistan. In a surprise move, China has halted funding to Pakistan for the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. While many say this is temporary, the funding squeeze will hit at least 3 infrastructure projects in the region. Amid growing differences, China is now clearly leveraging its checkbook, saying that it's rethinking the guidelines for the release of cash to Islamabad. What is on Beijing's mind? Here's a report.
China has turned off the tap on funding to Pakistan for 3 CPEC projects. A report in Pakistan's popular daily Dawn says that the delay will hit at least 3 road projects worth billions of dollars. These projects were supposed to be cleared last month during the joint working group meeting, but Pakistan was caught by surprise when China said it wants to introduce new guidelines for funding. Reports in Pakistani media say it isn't clear yet if more projects will suffer. These infrastructure projects were earlier part of Pakistan's own development agenda, but they were clubbed with CPEC by Islamabad when Beijing opened its checkbook. Both sides have had their differences in recent times. Pakistan recently turned down Beijing's offer of funding for the construction of the Diamir Bhasha Dam. It has also refused to allow free use of China's yuan for CPEC projects. CPEC has been caught in controversy since day one. Beside the violation of India's sovereignty and territorial integrity, the fundamental differences between Islamabad and Beijing has cast a shadow of doubt over the project. Bureau Report, WION.
Now to a Gravitas special. What happens when a North Korean citizen defects to the south? Dramatic footage of a soldier from the north making a dash across the border to the south stunned the world only a few days back. Now listen to the story of 3 other defectors just like him in their own words. WION's Manish Shukla has been getting you ground reports from the demilitarized zone between the 2 Koreas. This is the latest in our series of exclusive reports on North Korea. WION has blurred the faces of the defectors to protect their identities.
These are visuals the world has rarely seen. The North Korean soldier's daring dash caught on camera. He was shot at and injured. By the time he collapsed, he was out of their reach. In the cover of darkness, South Korean soldiers then carry him away. But he's not the only one. As many as 15,000 North Korean defectors now live in the south. Oppressed under the autocratic regime, they fled the north and somehow managed to cross the border alive. Before Kim Jong-un came to power, a few lucky ones managed to flee via China.
नॉर्थ कोरिया में भुखमरी फैली हुई है, लोगों के पास कुछ भी न खाने पीने को है.
Their lives were miserable in the north. They didn't have enough to eat. Many didn't have electricity or proper houses. They fled the north and reached the south via the China route.
नॉर्थ कोरिया से चीन होते हुए और उसके बाद फिर साउथ कोरिया आ रहे हैं.
But once the whimsical autocratic leader took charge of North Korea, the China border was fenced, closing that escape route.
My friend had escaped to China. After 3 years, she contacted me. My house is by the river. One day I dared to cross it.
Those who escape may have survived, but their family members are not spared.
हम इस वक्त साउथ कोरिया में हैं और यहाँ पर नॉर्थ कोरिया से हजारों की संख्या में.
We are in South Korea. Thousands of defectors come here from the north, but when the regime finds out and identifies the defectors, their families are targeted.
पता चलता है कि रिफ्यूजी साउथ कोरिया गए हैं तो उनके घर वालों की पहचान की जाती है.
My aunt was taken into custody when they identified me as a defector. I don't know if she's alive.
WION spoke to some of the defectors about life in the north.
साउथ कोरिया के खिलाफ
The North Korean TV channels broadcast propaganda and negative stories about the South. They try to brainwash people that life in the South is full of hardships and the journey to the South is risky.
बेहद मुश्किल है.
These defectors told us that North Koreans are forbidden from watching any programs from the South or from China. They are forbidden from accessing the internet or gathering knowledge about the rest of the world. If anyone dares to flout the rules, they are banished to the outskirts where there is no electricity.
I lived near the border. Before restriction, I could watch some Chinese TV. After restriction, some people sneaked in Korean or Chinese drama. But if government found out, you would be expelled to the countryside.
Not just entertainment, the autocratic, tyrannical regime of Kim Jong-un also restricts access to education. Only the wealthy can hope to go to college. The rest are doomed to a life of labor.
In North Korea, if you have to study more after high school, you have to be very rich. Otherwise, you work in a factory. The maximum possibility is vocational education. For me, there was no dream. There was no hope. That's why I dared to escape. Now, I have no fear.
The women tell us of more restrictions that even extend to what they can wear.
We have to cut our hair short. We can't wear short skirts or dye our hair.
We hear of endless horror stories, but the South Koreans do not want war. They hope for unification and peace, though they are prepared for any eventuality.
नॉर्थ कोरिया के मिसाइल और परमाणु हथियार जहां पूरी दुनिया के लिए खतरा है, वहीं उसके हमले का सबसे ज्यादा डर.
With North Korea testing missiles one after another, most South Koreans live under the threat of a nuclear war. And that is why the South Korean army is geared up for a special mission. 1,000 soldiers have received training so that if needed, they can enter the north and target the leadership of the regime. With Manish Shukla in Seoul, in New Delhi, Rahul Dalal for WION.
Meanwhile, here's what's happening on the ground. The United Nations political chief has begun a rare 4-day visit to North Korea today. The trip by Jeffrey Feltman is the first by a senior United Nations official in more than 6 years. He departed for North Korea from Beijing from the international airport. North Korea had extended an invitation to the UN back in September to visit for a quote-unquote policy dialogue. The invitation was formally confirmed on the 30th of November, interestingly, just a day after North Korea's most recent missile test. Feltman will meet North Korea's Foreign Minister Ri Yong, but is not scheduled to meet Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. Feltman is a former US diplomat and the highest-ranking American in the United Nations and will be in Pyongyang until Friday. His visit comes as South Korea and the US are conducting their largest ever round of aerial drills. Feltman was in Beijing yesterday. China, remember, is North Korea's main economic and diplomatic ally and has sent a top-ranking diplomat to Pyongyang only last month for talks with the North Korean leadership.
Is a response to a long-standing invitation from the authorities in Pyongyang for policy dialogue with the UN. We were able to confirm the visit on Thursday, November 30th. It'll be a wide-ranging discussion. I'm not going to go into any detail, but it'll be a wide-ranging policy discussion. Meanwhile, the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Jeffrey Feltman, will visit the Democratic People's Republic of Korea from the 5th to the 8th of December. Mr. Feltman will discuss with DPRK officials issues of mutual interest and concern, and he will also meet with the UN country team and members of the diplomatic corps in Pyongyang, as well as visit UN project sites. While in the region, he will be also visit China. In fact, he was in Beijing today, where he met with a number of senior officials.
Joining us this evening on Gravitas, Andrei Abramian, strategic affairs expert on South Korea, and Zachary Keck, Public Affairs Fellow at the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center from Washington, D.C. Good evening to both of you. Andre, to you first. How significant is this visit of the United Nations representative to Pyongyang at this point?
Well, we don't know yet how significant it may turn out to be because we don't have a strong sense for what the UN is willing to propose and what the North Koreans are also willing to do in terms of working with the UN towards some kind of compromise situation.
And what's expected from it?
Again, it's difficult to know, but one thing we might look at is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Actually, earlier this year, U.S. Senator John McCain called the current situation in Korea a slow-motion version of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And actually, during that period in 1962, the UN Secretary General U Thant was very active in shuttling between the Soviet Union and the United States, and in fact helped provide political cover by presenting initiatives as UN initiatives when really they were requests from one side or the other. So perhaps Feltman on this trip is trying to set up involvement by the UN Secretary General, and then we'll see whether the United States or North Korea are able to use that office's stature to find some kind of compromise positions.
Zachary, the first invitation came in September. It's been 6 years since a United Nations representative traveled to Pyongyang. What has prompted the UN to make this move now?
Well, actually, I think the invitation came from the North Korean side. I do believe that...
Yes, but it came in September. It was accepted 2 months late.
No, the North Koreans first broached the topic in September, but they didn't receive an official invitation until November 30th, is my understanding at least. And I think the UN has always wanted to be involved in trying to settle this dispute between North Korea and the U.S. and South Korea. So I don't think it's... I think the UN would like to settle this, but the greater question is, what is North Korea's motive here? And we just don't know that at this time.
All right. While this happens, Andre, we know that the US and South Korea are conducting fresh drills. This muscle flexing is going on. Are talks on at any level between the US and the Korean side?
It doesn't seem as if talks are imminent. Both sides are clearly trying to signal that they are tough. Although North Korea did open perhaps a little window after its last missile test when it said we've completed our testing program. We'll see if the United States thinks that's a genuine statement or a statement worth pursuing. But as of right now, both sides are still talking and acting tough.
Zachary, looking at the facts of the case, this military exercise between the US and South Koreans involves 12,000 personnel. For the first time, the US F-22 stealth Raptors, which are precision bombing aircraft that the North Koreans will not be able to detect, are being used. The North Korean Foreign Ministry said that the Trump administration was, quote-unquote, begging for nuclear war. Trump's security advisor, H.R. McMaster, said, and I'm quoting again, North Korea is the greatest immediate threat to the US. Is a war imminent?
I don't believe so. I think when you look at the actual reality, there's no way a war could be pulled off without the deaths of thousands, perhaps millions of people. And I think that kind of destruction really clarifies things for policymakers. I do think what the U.S. is hoping to accomplish with this military drill is more than anything else reassuring the South Koreans who have been skittish, understandably, given all the advances in the North Korean nuclear program and missile program recently.
Andre, we've seen a year of dangerous nuclear brinkmanship from Donald Trump's statements to the response from the Korean leader. Reports now say that the U.S. is going to wait till March before launching an attack. What are you picking up?
But with tensions so high and tensions lasting so long, there is the possibility that one side or the other miscalculates and tries to get away with something that the other side sees as a red line. So I don't expect an invasion by the United States, but I could see a mistake, perhaps a limited strike or some kind of flyby over North Korean territory that initiates a response and then some kind of escalation. I think that is something to worry about. People talk about March because that is a time, usually in the spring, when the Americans and South Koreans are running exercises. And so they have more material on the peninsula than usual.
Zachary, reports also telling us that the CIA has told Donald Trump that he has a 3-month window in which to halt the North Korean ICBM program, after which Pyongyang will have the capability to hit American cities, including Washington, with a nuclear payload.
Well, I haven't seen those reports, but it makes sense. The last North Korean ICBM test last month showed that it had the missile had the range to reach Washington, D.C. most likely, but the re-entry vehicle did not survive, so they seem to have to do a few more tests before they have the capability. Either way, though, even if North Korea can't hit the United States with a nuclear weapon, they very well could hit South Korea and Japan, which would cause untold destruction and kill thousands, perhaps millions, depending on how many were used, including a lot of Americans on the ground.
Coming back to the visit of the United Nations representative, Zachary, is it clear that Kim Jong-un from the very beginning wanted to be called to the talking table and he's willing to talk now?
No, I don't think it's clear at all. I think what's clear is that Kim Jong-un wants to acquire the capability to launch nuclear weapon strikes against the United States, whether as a means to deter the United States from invading North Korea or for some coercive measures. I think that's what's clear. It's possible now that as enough tests demonstrate this capability, that he will be willing to negotiate with the United States and South Korea, but I don't think that he will be at this time because he hasn't demonstrated that capability, as I was just discussing.
Andre and Zachary, thanks very much for joining us with your perspective. This, as I said, remains a developing story in the Trump administration. Still, some say believes that China holds the key. How much is China willing to intervene from the American side is a question. Joining us this evening is Dr. Luca D'Avola, a social anthropologist from Italy. He's someone who has lived in Yemen and researched extensively in that country, on that country. In fact, Dr. D'Avola, my first question to you, this war has seen a bloody stalemate between both sides, and the Saudi Arabian side was hoping that with President Saleh switching sides, it will tip the scales in favor of the government there. Now that he's been killed, is there anyone else who wields that kind of clout, who has that kind of influence to be able to broker peace?
Good evening, first of all. Clearly, the Saudi-led coalition thought that Ali Abdullah Saleh was their best chance to reach a peace agreement. And now that he's dead, it will be hard for them to find another interlocutor. Right now, the son of Ali Abdullah Saleh, Ahmed Abdullah Saleh, who was the head of the Republican Guards in Yemen and who had control of a wide part of the Yemeni army, is in Riyadh, and he promised that he will avenge his father's death. Probably Ahmed is the best chance for the Saudi-led coalition and for Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman to reach to a peaceful conclusion in Yemen, if this is still possible, even if the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Ahmed Abdullah Saleh was tense. And it seems that just a few months ago there was a personal clash between Mohammed bin Salman and Ahmed, and that right now the Emirates are brokering the negotiations with Ahmed Abdullah Saleh.
We've seen 5 days of fighting, 25 airstrikes overnight, more than 230 people killed according to the Red Cross. Yemen has become a violent front in a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Do you see international players trying to intervene as millions in the country face a lethal famine?
Well, basically, it's very hard for international players to intervene in the country because the situation is very fragmented right now in Yemen, because the country is divided not only between the legitimate government in the south and the Houthis in the north. Already in the north, it was split between the forces loyal to Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis, who mainly controlled the northern parts of the country. And it seems very likely that the Houthis, they will be able to keep the control of the northern part of the country. All the efforts that the international organizations made to relieve the population, and especially reaching to the possibility of unleashing the embargo that is blocking the country since many months, they failed. And what's more worrying is that in the southern part of the country right now, it seems that President Hadi doesn't have the power to rule and to control his own coalition, since the Emirates are backing the Southern Transitional Council. So it's hard to understand how the country is going to split in these circumstances.
Indeed. Dr. Luca Navola, thanks very much for joining us with your insights on what's happening in Yemen. The civil war in Yemen has sparked, as we've been saying, the largest humanitarian crisis and disaster in the world right now. The casualty numbers paint an extremely grim picture. The United Nations has recorded more than 13,000 civilian deaths. More than 1,500 children have died in the civil war so far, according to the records. Almost as many have been recruited as child soldiers, mostly by the Houthi forces. But this is only one side of the story. The destruction of infrastructure and the Saudi naval blockade has crippled the country, choking the supply of medicines and aid, pushing Yemen to the brink of a famine. UNICEF says that one child dies every 10 minutes in Yemen. 400,000 are at the risk of starvation. More than 2 million need urgent care. That is the picture in Yemen. And some breaking news we're getting right now from West Asia. The Palestinian media is reporting that US President Donald Trump has informed Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas that he plans to move the US embassy to Jerusalem. It will be a major move, and how does it impact the peace process is something that we'll have to see. Remember, this was one of Donald Trump's election promises. He said that he is going to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. If he indeed walks the talk, America will be the first country to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and this is going to impact the peace process. Donald Trump has also promised what he calls the ultimate deal for peace in West Asia. His son-in-law and top advisor Jared Kushner has been working towards achieving that, and reports say that he was not in favor of moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is according to Palestinian media reports, which say that Donald Trump has finally arrived at the decision. When he traveled to Israel earlier this year, there was a lot of speculation and anticipation that he is going to announce that decision. Instead, what he did was extremely controversial and something that did not go down very well with Israel. He visited the Western Wall. He kept mum on his promise, and he's not going to be the first president who has broached the idea. Remember, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton too have discussed the idea of moving Jerusalem, moving their embassy to Jerusalem, but eventually decided against it. This is a new president in the White House, and he's been very vocal about what he feels. Remember, his son-in-law and daughter are both practicing Orthodox Jews. The Jewish lobby wields a lot of influence in Washington, and this is going to be a huge win for them. Although many European countries, including permanent members of the UN Security Council, have been saying that this move is going to be counterproductive. Joining me live from the newsroom is my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran. Ramesh, what have we picked up from the Palestinian media so far?
Well, Palki, this is what we know so far, and this is coming via the Palestinian news outlet Wafa, which Reuters and AP are quoting. It says a readout of President Trump's telephone call with President Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine. And according to him, Trump has conveyed his intention to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We don't know what that exactly means. Is it going to happen immediately or sometime in the future? That's still a point worth considering. But the fact remains that Trump, according to reports, has conveyed his intention to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. All of this comes at a time when Saudi Arabia, France, Jordan, Turkey all have expressed concerns over the fallout or the repercussions or the consequences of this decision. And it remains to be seen whether Trump actually goes ahead with his decision of moving the embassy to Jerusalem or not.
Indeed, and this is going to have consequences. The French President Emmanuel Macron has spoken against it. So have senior officials and members of the German government. But what's also important to note, Ramesh, is the fact that Jared Kushner, who is the key figure in West Asian affairs in Washington, is also believed to be against this move.
Well, Palki, if I heard you correct, you're talking about Jared Kushner's moves in West Asia as far as the peace process is concerned. We've seen even in such previous administrations, especially under Obama administration, when the then Secretary of State and others were busy with ensuring or trying to forge a peace between Israel and Palestine, that proved futile. And this is another attempt by the Trump administration to forge some kind of an understanding between Israel and Palestine. But that said, Palestinians are very clear. There are three clear demands. One, that East Jerusalem has to be the capital of a future Palestine state, number one. Number two, that the 1967 borders have to be respected and established on the ground between Israel and Palestine. And three, the right of return of Palestinian refugees back to Israel. So these three are the red lines as far as Palestinians go. But that said, it remains to be seen whether Palestinians will actually, how they will react going forward if indeed Trump decides to go ahead with the decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Yes, and the local media are quoting the spokesperson for Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, saying that Donald Trump in a telephonic conversation informed the Palestinian president about his intention to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. This is going to have an impact, as we've been saying, consequences for the peace talks. And this comes at a very interesting time, just weeks after the so-called rapprochement between Hamas and Fatah. And we were seeing a political restructuring, as it were, in Palestine. Joining us is Lior Weinstraub, former diplomat, on the phone line with us from Jerusalem. Lior, what are you picking up on the ground? Do we have a date? Do we have a timeline that the U.S. president is talking about? He had a telephonic conversation with Mahmoud Abbas.
Well, I believe this is a long-awaited development and a very positive development. I mean, Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for 70 years now, and for, I would say, historic misjustice, it's been not recognized, or the embassy was not placed in Jerusalem. So I think the fact that the Trump administration is signaling now that he is intended to obey the American law and cancel the waiver and recognize Jerusalem as the eternal and undivided capital of Jerusalem is a very positive development. I don't know about the timeline. This is just, it's breaking now, and my understanding is that we'll see a speech by President Trump either on Wednesday or Thursday, and he will announce his policy then. But I think it's also a major and positive development to the prospect of the renewal of the peace process in the Middle East.
The Americans already have a diplomatic presence in Jerusalem, and I understand your point of view when you say that this is a positive development. Developments very, very significant symbolically, but the Europeans, as much as people in West Asia, are saying that this is going to be counterproductive when it comes to the peace deal. Would you agree?
Well, I'll tell you what is counterproductive. In the last 8 or almost 10 years, we didn't see any development on the ground or any kind of development in the negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. The Palestinians did not come to the table in the last 8 years during the Obama administration. And I think this doesn't make sense to give the Palestinian, to let the Palestinian leadership crisis and the Palestinian intransigence give a veto over Israeli standing in the world, over its relationship with its best friend in the world, the United States. So I think the fact that something is moving now, it's also a major signal to the Palestinians that if they'll come to the table, they have something to learn as well. Now, it means to say that there is a bipartisan support in the United States by Republican and Democrats to this move, including Minority Leader Senator Chuck Schumer, and there's also wall-to-wall support in Israel. I mean, the Israeli political system is even more divided than the Indian one. And there's one thing, there are a few things the Israelis agree upon, and this is Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and that the embassy should move. And I see it as a positive signal. I really think this can be something that will motivate both sides to come to the table and talk peace, as all of us want to see.
All right, Lior Weinstraub, thanks very much for joining us. Dr. Mordechai Kedar from the Bar-Ilan University from Israel also joining us. Dr. Kedar, your first reaction, and what have you heard about Donald Trump finally making his decision? He said it in the past. We haven't seen him do it.
Well, before we talk about Trump, we should remind everybody that a month ago, Vladimir Putin, have you heard about this man? Vladimir Putin announced that he recognizes the western part of Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. So, and I didn't say here any problem with the Palestinians. I didn't hear problems with the Arabs or the Muslims or anyone in the world. And all of a sudden, when Trump wants to say...
But Putin hasn't moved the embassy to Jerusalem, has he?
Very, very strange and really not serious. However, the Palestinians are the funniest people here in the world. They never had a Palestinian state. They never had a capital. So why do they want the Israeli, the Jewish capital, which is our capital for 3,000 years already? What do they want? To take our hearts out of our body? This is what they want, to destroy Israel altogether? And we suspect that this is what they want. So now they are outraged because Putin a month ago and Trump maybe tomorrow actually support the existence of the state of Israel as a state of the Jews as it was already 3,000 years ago with Jerusalem as its capital. I really don't understand what is their problem.
Right. I understand it's a very emotional subject for you. Thanks very much, Dr. Kedar, for joining us from Tel Aviv. Ramesh, the Palestinians have been saying that they are going to break diplomatic ties with any country that recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. But the Palestinians have very limited options. Their best bet were the Arab countries who are also siding, it seems, with Israel to form an alliance against Iran. Where does this leave Palestine?
Well, clearly, Palestinians have a tough task on their hands, Palki. But in the last few minutes, we've heard from the spokesperson, Nabil Abu Dana, of President Mahmoud Abbas, issuing a statement. And if I can just quote him, it says, President Mahmoud Abbas received a telephone call from U.S. President Donald Trump in which he notified the President Abbas, it means, of his intention to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The statement goes on to say that President Abbas warned of the consequences, the dangerous consequences such a decision would have to the peace process and to the peace, security and stability of the region and of the world. This is coming from the spokesperson of President Mahmoud Abbas.
Indeed, this is the latest that we are picking up from Palestine. This is a conversation that he had, and this is something that we've heard in the past from Donald Trump. He keeps changing his mind, so it isn't really a done deal just yet, but the Israelis, interestingly, Ramesh, see Donald Trump as their best bet in pushing the Israeli agenda in Washington. They have a lot of clout, but this is a president who's come after 8 years of the Obama administration, and President Obama and the Israeli Prime Minister weren't on the best of terms, to say the least.
Absolutely, Palki. The question, which is agitating many minds around the world at the moment would be, will and can Trump succeed where Obama failed? And that, to my mind, is a key question to answer at this point in time. We've seen Obama try for 8 years without much success. And now Trump has Kushner and others working other channels to have some sort of an understanding, a modus vivendi between Israel and Palestine. And this decision may not go down well with many of the U.S. allies in the region and beyond, Palki. We've heard from Saudi Arabia, from France, from Jordan, from Turkey. All have expressed concerns over the consequences, the repercussions, the fallout of moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This at a time when Palestinians say they have 3 red lines. One, that East Jerusalem has to be the capital of a future Palestine state, number one. Number two, that the right of return of refugees should be guaranteed and respected. And 3, the 1967 borders have to be adhered to. So these are the red lines which Palestinians say must be adhered to and respected. But the decision to move the embassy would, many say, would have catastrophic consequences for peace in the region and beyond. But that said, Palki, Martin Indyk, a former U.S. Special Envoy, has suggested in his op-ed to publish in a section of the American media yesterday that if at all Trump decides to go ahead with this decision, in that case, he should also insist that East Jerusalem shall be the capital of the future Palestine state. Now, that remains to be seen whether Trump will insist on that or not.
Right. Arsen Ostrovsky, international human rights lawyer, also a senior representative of the Israeli Jewish Congress, with us on the phone line. Arsen, we've been speaking about this. We had a discussion yesterday, and you said there is no wrong time to do the right thing. This is the best time, and this should be done. And it seems the White House is going to come up with an official statement very soon on this.
Yeah, correct, Mark. It looks like all reports indicating that President Trump has informed President Abbas of his intention to move the embassy and therefore recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, noting also that the official embassy waiver expired yesterday. With that being said, I think we still need to wait until we get the final details, which should be forthcoming, if not this evening, then in the next 24 hours when the President is due to make a formal statement after consulting with the leaders. But from Israel's perspective, like I said, there is never the wrong time to do the right thing. From Israel's side, this really would be a sense of correcting a long overdue injustice. Israelis consider Jerusalem our eternal undivided capital. So this would be a powerful show, not just to the Palestinians, showing to them a message that no longer will the United States abide by the threats and intimidation, but also correcting this injustice, in which Israel has been the only country under international law which ought to be able to designate its capital, but has not been allowed to do so.
Thanks very much, Arsen, for joining us. Also with us from Tel Aviv live this evening, Mayor Javed Anfar, Middle East analyst. Mayor, I know I'm speaking to an Israeli, but I can't help asking, is this really the best decision?
To be honest with you, this is something that Israelis all want, but it's not on the top priority list for many Israelis. If you look at all the elections, for example, the last election we had in Israel on March 17, 2015, that issue wasn't even on the top 3 or top 4. The high cost of living, the socio-economic issue was the most important issue. So I think although ideally many Israelis would love the idea that the United States would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, first of all, it's not on the priority list. And second of all, if it's not done as part of a bilateral process with the Palestinians, however difficult it may be, it may actually create problems for us in terms of our relations with countries such as Jordan, who are very important security partners, and also create instability in the Middle East in terms of demonstrations in other countries. So although the intention is good and many Israelis would back it, I'm not so sure right now is the best time, and especially unilaterally doing it while shunning the Palestinians completely would serve Israel's interest at the moment.
Right, Mayor, thanks very much. I'm out of time on this, but this is the big breaking news that we are bringing our viewers this evening. Donald Trump is going to make it official, the announcement of moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, an official statement expected from the White House any minute now. We're wrapping up this edition of Gravitas.